Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our day 2 in our SALISES 25th Annual Conference, looking at the issues of translating thought to action towards decolonial justice and equity. We welcome you, and we hope you enjoy our proceedings and also get engaged through the discussion. This morning, we're leading with a Reparations Plenary, which is being co-organized by our institute with the Center for Reparations Research, which is led by Professor Verene, who shouldn't be no stranger to you, but I'd just like to introduce her with a few words. So Professor Shepherd is a graduate of the University of West Indies and University of Cambridge, a fellow of the Cambridge Commonwealth Society, and an honorary fellow at Jesus College, Cambridge. She's Professor Emerita of History and Gender Studies at the University of West Indies. She's also the current chair of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the oldest treaty body in the UN system that implements the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Professor, I should say that, Professor Director, is also a consultant director at the Center for Reparations Research at UNIA, a vice chair of the Caribbean Reparations Commission, and a member of the Jamaican National Council on Reparation. She's a published author, too much to mention, editor, co-editor of several books, refereed articles. Among them, she has with Ahmed Reed, Gabrielle, Hemmings, and John Shorter, Appleton Estate, from Dickerson Family to the Compari Group, A Short History in 2022. And then with Gabrielle Hemmings, who's also one of our panelists today, an introduction to reparation for secondary schools, very important work. And then she has also done an important biography of Lucille Matthew Meir and looked at livestock, sugar, and slavery contested terrains in colonial Jamaica. She's also a radio personality. She hosted Talking History on Nationwide 90 FM in Jamaica for 12 years. I was one of the guests. And she's a past chair of the UN Working Group of experts on people of African descent, past president of the Association of Caribbean Historians, as well as a former university director of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, during which she spearheaded the production of the UA Gender Policy, which we're now implementing, and a board member of the UA Glasgow Center, which is a development center that is being coordinated between us and University of Glasgow through a memorandum of understanding, and they have a new MSc program there on reparative justice. She has received several awards, including the UWI Vice Chancellor's Award for Excellence for Public Service, the Order of Distinction, the Commander Class from the Government of Jamaica for her work on history and gender studies and her public service, and the Africana Studies Distinguished Award, and the 2020 President's Book Fair Award from St. Martin. Wow, and that's the shorter version. So we are really delighted and very honored to have Professor Shepherd grace us with her intellectual power and her vitality in pursuing the reparations project. And I just wanted to make a brief plug for a SALISES Haiti outreach that we've been doing. We've been working on from last year. We signed an MOU with the university between us, the Haiti-Jamaica Society, the president of which is Ms. Myrtha Désulmé, and we have been working together for a number of years now on this project, trying to get help to the children of Haiti. And this is the banner that we created to just bring your attention to it. The school, I'll just say a few words, if you allow me. So this is a co-educational kindergarten and primary school. It's called Global Vision School. It was founded in 2005 and led by Principal and Pastor Kalist Isalem. It caters to some 200 children, boys and girls between the ages of 3 to 17, who reside near to the Haiti-Dominican Republic border in the region of Las Cahobas. The institution is located in a depressed rural area and in the Central Department of Haiti, and is registered with the Las Cahogas School District Office. Unfortunately, the community the school serves have been devastated by the border closure and conflicts with the Dominican Republic, as cross-border training was one of their main means of survival. So I'm going to ask you to do, look in your brochures. I think there's a flyer there, but if you go to our website, there's Haiti Help information where you can click on and get further information in terms of how to donate and support this project. They're desperately in need of our support. At this point, they basically have to be closed down unless we can support them. So I'm now going to turn over proceedings to Professor Shepherd, and welcome again.
Thank you very much, Pat, and thank you for always supporting the Center for Reparation Research and for inviting us to be a part of this conference. Greetings as well to all the panelists, all the guests who have come in for this conference, or SALISES team, members are all here, and also UWI staff and administrators. Welcome everyone. As you have heard, this panel is focused on reparations for epistemic and colonial violence, pathways for decolonial equity and justice. So I will be your moderator for this panel, part of whose rationale is located within the Durban Declaration and Program of Action's logic that, and I quote, historical injustices have undeniably contributed to the poverty, underdevelopment, marginalization, social exclusion, economic disparities, instability, and insecurity that affect many people in different parts of the world, in particular in developing countries, and recognizes the need to develop programs for the social and economic development of these societies and the diaspora within the framework of a new partnership based on the spirit of solidarity and mutual respect, end of quote. So I move now to introduce our panelists, and I apologize to them because I'm going to try and keep the introduction short. I think that the full profiles are on the website. So let me start with our Kasike, Kalaan Kaiman. He's the chief of the Yamaye, Taíno peoples, or the Jamaican Hummingbird Taíno people. He's also the Caribbean region's organizer for Peace and Dignity Journeys, an intertribal prayer run, and holds membership in the Council of Indigenous Traditional Healers of the Americas, Yamaye Council of Indigenous Leaders, and the Caribbean Organization of Indigenous Peoples. And Chief Kalaan is an Indigenous rights activist and promotes recognition of his people in Jamaica, as well as the rights of Indigenous peoples across the region. And I know that many people think the Taíno people don't exist, but we have him here. Dr. Marcus Goffe is a Jamaican attorney at law with over 20 years experience in several areas of law, and Marcus is sitting next to Chief. Several areas of law, including human rights law, intellectual property law, indigenous rights law, and cannabis law. He is a partner of the law firm Goffe Law in Jamaica and serves as an advisor to several indigenous, tribal, and local community organizations in the island here. He holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of the West Indies and a Master of Laws and a Doctor of Philosophy PhD degree from the Queen Mary University of London. And I think you lecture here in the law faculty. Great to have you. I move on now to Ms. Myrtha Désulmé, and I've known her like forever because we're all involved in the Haiti-Jamaica Society. She's a speaker, writer, interpreter, translator, business consultant, columnist, media resource person, and longtime advocate for her native Haiti, whose mission is to contribute to the liberation and renaissance of her country. Educated in France and Jamaica, she also studied in Spain, Germany, and the United States, majoring in languages and literature at the University of the West Indies and Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. She's a linguist who speaks 5 modern languages and need to take some lessons, especially in French. In 2005, she founded the Haiti-Jamaica Society, which later contributed to the success of the 2007 bicentennial year, the passing of the British Abolition Act. And the Haiti-Jamaica Society, of course, promotes Haiti, assists Haitian migrants and refugees, and defends their civil and human rights. Mr. Stephen Golding, next to Myrtha, you know him, lots of you. He is the president of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA, and African Communities League in Jamaica, founded by the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey in 1914. He's a professor of Garveyism, and Golding chairs the Garvey Studies Department at the Hyder University in St. Catherine, Jamaica. He has executively produced media content on both radio and television since the early 2000s. I used to listen to your program, Stephen, and learned from you when I became a radio host myself. And he's also the founding director of Jamaica's only authentic African cuisine restaurant, Cafe Africa, and I went there for Cameroon food some years ago. He serves as a member of the Jamaica National Council on Reparations, as well as the Institute of Jamaica's Council, and has served as chairman of the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica and the Jamaica Memory Bank. And he's the son of the 8th Prime Minister of Jamaica, Honorable Bruce Golding. And now I come to Gabrielle, who has co-published with me, as you have heard. And Gabrielle is a 2023 United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights Fellow of African descent. They have this fellowship every year. She currently works as a research consultant on racial and reparatory justice at the Center for Reparation Research, where her areas of specialty include intersectionality, legacies of chattel enslavement and colonialism, and racial injustices faced by minority ethnic groups. Gabrielle previously was a full-time researcher in the center, but then she went away to do her master's at the University of Birmingham. And worked also with me and Dr. Naya, Dr. Stanley Naya and others, on the first master's program in reparatory justice, now being taught at the University of Glasgow and the University of the West Indies. So, she's a graduate, of course, of the UWI, where she obtained a BSc in International Relations and Management Studies with a first-class honors, and a graduate of the University of Birmingham, where she completed her MSc, gaining a distinction on the theme Poverty, Inequality, and Development. And you heard about her publications already with me. So, the format is like this. Each panelist will answer 4 questions, each from his or her standpoint. Short answers, I've warned them, so that we can have time for interaction with you, the audience. And I'm going to begin with Kasike, Kalaan, Kaiman, because the indigenous peoples felt the first impact of conquest and colonialism, and they have been struggling the longest for reparatory justice. So, Chief, first of all, why do people, I'm adding this back with apologies, because I have to have this answer here recorded. So why do people feel the indigenous peoples do not exist, especially in our country? And what does repair mean from your standpoint?
All right, Usakasi, everyone, good day. To answer the first part of the question, why? The reason that, especially in the English-speaking Caribbean, other than Dominica, there's this assumption of our extinction is because that was a conscious attempt at paper genocide. So during the history books, what was done is that our people were written out because if there were no indigenous people, then there'd be claims to our lands, our territories, our spaces. For us, repair is obviously healing a lot of that. In the indigenous concept, the repair would deal with healing of ourselves as people, individuals, healing our relationship to our land, our relationship to our community, and really combating the trauma that we've all faced of epistemic violence and colonial violence. So from that, there'll be a lot of things that would come up as it relates to how we can heal, how we can transform the trauma that we've been suffering. So for us, it is about our day-to-day lives and reclaiming parts of our ancestry, our story, our culture that was in opposition to the colonial way, and as such, there were systems put in place to try and take that from us.
So it's the same question for each of you, and Marcus, you're next, but in case you've forgotten it, what does repair mean from your standpoint?
Good morning, everyone. Good to be here and to have the center doing all this important work for all of us, past, present, and future. So what reparations means in the context of what we're talking about here is really to seek to recognize, I think, the magnitude of what has been the enslavement of Africans and the transatlantic slave trade and all the continuing consequences and legacies of that we, as descendants of Africans here, are laboring under, you know, and to put in place mechanisms and structures and institutions that can facilitate the recovery, the empowerment, and the healing from all of that. And that is what we really see as reparation. So it's a kind of multi-dimensional, right, multi-dimensional, we always hear about oftentimes. Financial, so financials are part of it, but multi-dimensional, social, cultural, religious, political, spiritual, and of course, in terms of self-identity and rights, and I just say healing. That's what we really mean by reparations.
So Myrtha, it's your turn now to deal with this first question. What does repair mean from your standpoint?
So, bonjour tout le monde. I thought I'd follow the chief and greet you in Haitian Creole. So the apocalyptic catastrophe that we are witnessing in Haiti did not emerge by natural combustion. It has been carefully engineered over 500 years of, starting with slavery and colonization and destruction and structural destabilization to lead to structural violence and instability, to the point that we have now reached where violent criminals have literally taken over, have been empowered, I have to say that, empowered and enabled to take an entire country hostage. So it's a bit hard to even know where to begin in terms of what repair looks like, but okay, for the sake of time, let's start with the odious extortion, the ransom that France forced Haiti to pay in 1825, because, as you know, Haiti is the only country to have won its independence as a result of the slave rebellion. And it wasn't a rebellion, it was a 12-year war of independence, where they conquered the French, the British, the Spanish. And so, because they could not be conquered on the battlefield, the French now decided to reestablish slavery long distance by blockading Haiti and preventing her from having any commerce or trade, in order to literally put a gun to her head to accept, to pay a ransom in order for that stranglehold to be taken off. And she, got into collaboration with the US and all the other colonial powers to also blockade Haiti. So the Haitians were forced then, after having won their independence on the battlefield with the price of their blood, they now had to, and imagine a 12-year war where the country was devastated, and the little resources they had left to rebuild the country, they now had to spend 122 years paying France, one of the richest countries in the world, after 300 years of slavery and exploitation, had already built up the magnificence of France. So Haiti now was forced to pay 80% of its GDP for, from 1825 to 1947 to France. And the objective was to ensure that Haiti would never emerge as a nation, and that objective was achieved. So the first thing that we would need to do would be to repay the odious ransom, which was, it was 150 million francs at the time, doubled by usurious interest rates because Haiti had no money and had to borrow from French banks to pay back the ransom. So it was calculated at, estimated at about 21 billion about 35 years ago, and then it went up to about 40 billion. But the truth is that it is incalculable. You cannot calculate what it took, from Haiti, that for 2 centuries, she was not able to invest in her own development, build schools, build hospitals, build roads, build anything that a country needs to flourish, infrastructure, everything. So that would need to be repaid, and then investments need to be made to build up infrastructure, schools, and everything that Haiti was deprived of over these centuries.
Thank you, Myrtha. And Stephen, the same question for you. And as a reminder, what does repair mean from your standpoint?
Morning, everyone. The dictionary has 2 strong definitions when you look up reparations. One is the action of making amends for a wrong one has done by providing payment or other assistance to those who have been wronged. The second is the compensation for war damage paid by a defeated state. Both of those definitions are applicable to the struggle of African people. In the first case, we have been bamboozled to some extent by the colonial narrative of history that we've gotten. And as the Kasike said, it's almost like a paper war, right? We have heard various things, we've been taught various things through a colonial educational system. But when you really check it out, it really misrepresents the truth of what happens. And even as Africans who are descended from enslaved Africans, we for a long time have lacked a true understanding of what slavery was like and what it was about and what happened, right? My own research in recent years have taught me things that I'm wondering why these things were not taught to me in school. And it is because that when you know the truth, you realize the crimes that Europe had committed. And so they're invested in covering up this crime by controlling our understanding of what happened, right? I'm not going to go into it long, but look up the history of the Congo Kingdom. Look up the letters from the King of the Congo to the King of Portugal. And I'm talking about where, the epicenter of where chattel slavery began. And it didn't begin that way. Look at the role of the Christian church in bringing Portugal to the Congo Kingdom. The fact that the princes were Christianized, the fact that you had Congolese royal family members who were going to school in Portugal at the time. And this is early 1490s, so this is even before the onslaught of the plantation system. That letter proves that from the very beginning of chattel slavery, Europe committed a crime. They knew they were committing a crime, Africans knew they were committing a crime, and Africans complained about this crime, right? So reparation being defined as where, compensation for a wrong that was done, it starts there. But if we get a narrative, as the Queen says, that slavery was legal, or if we continue to spew this mispropaganda that, Africans sold each other, this is what has perpetuated centuries of lack of understanding, and why some Africans themselves didn't even believe that we had a right to demand reparations, because we didn't understand the truth of the crimes that were committed. The second definition, you guys don't need me to read it again, I need to read it again. The compensation for war damage paid by a defeated state. Garveyism is about Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is about understanding our struggles as black people all over the world as being part of one commonality. As a result of colonialism, we hug up this idea of our history as Jamaicans. We might hug up our history as Haitians. There's a separation there that blinds us to the truth of the fact that black people fought a war against slavery. If we look at them in isolated incidents as, oh, the Maroons of Jamaica did this, or Sam Sharp did this, and then the Bajans are talking about what Bossa did, or the Dominicans are talking about King Chataway and what he did in separate incidences, it blinds us to the fact that from the very beginning, African people fought a war, because this is what slavery was to us. And if you look at it as a culmination of different battles on different arenas, and using Haiti as the zenith of that point, we need to understand that we did fight against slavery, and we won. And we're the only people who have won a war who have then been made to pay reparation as victors, which is what Myrtha was pointing out.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And you may have to send those papers and that correspondence to which you referred to the parliamentarians in Portugal, who have now gone against what the president has said is due. Anyway, Gabrielle, you will end this first question with your intervention.
Yeah. So I will just underscore what was already said. I think Stephen started by actually saying that typically when you think of repair, which is fixing something that is broken, or reparation, which means making amends for a wrong that was done, that is typically what we go with as reparatory justice academic activists. However, recently I was conducting and presenting at a workshop to a delegation from the United Kingdom on the obvious need for reparatory justice, and contextualizing that in terms of our contemporary developmental realities in the Caribbean. And we had an engaging conversation, but what I asked them at the end that propelled this discussion was, firstly, how do we repair the trauma that has been inflicted, that we have owing to the violence that has been inflicted upon us. A part of that is epistemic, physical, sexual, psychological. And the second question was, how do we break the cycle that we were thrust into, that we were propelled into as a result of colonialism and chattel enslavement? And that for me is what repair means. How do we heal the trauma? There's so many things that we can think of. We don't have generational wealth in the Caribbean, we have generational poverty. And that is a cycle that we have been entrenched in. How do we break out of that cycle, and how do we heal the trauma?
Thank you very much for this round. And Gabrielle, I'm going to continue with you and come in the opposite direction, because you have incorporated many of these ideas about reparatory justice in your research. So the second question is about how, or what are the implications of decoloniality in charting a reparations agenda? But I want to make it specific to you, to ask you, how have you, that question, but how have you incorporated the concept of decolonial justice in your research and writing?
Excellent question, Prof. So I will speak from the standpoint as not only a reparatory justice activist, academic activist as Prof. Shepard and I identify as, but also someone who has now done a lot of study and work in international development. And I think the field of international development is a good case study for that. The truth is, decoloniality and reparatory justice cannot be separate. They actually have to work hand in hand for us to have anything coming to fruition. And a good example of that is the fact that in the field of reparatory justice, and I know there are people who do, in the field of development rather, and I know there are people who are studying that as well, we have always been told that poverty exists in countries in the quote-unquote global south, and that it is in essence the obligation of international development institutions to work through charitable means to address the development issues that we have in the global south. And these ideas are usually from the global north. However, and I can say this recently as an academic in international development, we are not told explicitly that this underdevelopment, this persistent poverty in the Caribbean, for instance, is owing to the wealth extraction by countries from the global north where these ideas are. And that is why there has been, after the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, a call for decolonizing approaches to aid. Decolonizing this approach that aid should be charitable, it should be a favor, as opposed to it being preparatory justice. And the truth is, we will not be able to realize reparative justice, for instance, in the field of development, addressing developmental issues as the CARICOM Reparations Commission has so aptly advocated for. We will not be able to see that coming to fruition if we are not decolonizing the ways in which we look at development. The obvious fact that is known to us that we are not developing but underdeveloped owing to the wealth extraction and the development, or at the expense of the development of the global north. And so that is why the two have to work in hand, because if you do not decolonize the way that something is seen, there will not be enough consensus to realize reparative justice.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. And now, Marcus, I want you to maybe address that, but also to ask you how you have incorporated this concept of decolonial justice in your own advocacy, but also in your legal work.
Okay, thanks, Prof. So in terms of decolonial justice, from a legal standpoint, I see that as being really requiring a interrogation of all that we received from the colonizers and the slave masters, which includes the entire justice system, the structure of it, structure of governance, the constitution, the way we think about rights, and the way we structure our society, because all of that we know is stemming from, right, the imbalanced and racially driven motives of the colonizers, which we, by not interrogating and seeking to remove the injustices of it, we are perpetuating, And that's a big part, I think, of what are the shackles that continue to hold us, even mentally too, because the law guides how we think about rights and people and who we are and what is just. And so, for me, in general, I think about then, therefore, looking at from the very structure of what we have, the monarchy, right? What we have inherited as we call it the three branches of government. Parliament, you have the judiciary, you have the executive, right? So the people were never in that structure. We know from the colonial system that was always, again, the wealthy and the well-to-do and the white planted who had legal and political power. So again, if we don't interrogate those things and seek to decolonize them, right, to de-racialize them, to remove them of the inherent evil that we know they were created out of, and again, we will never be able to achieve this reparation, because we'll always be infighting because of this lack of recognition, So from my perspective in my own legal work, I think that one of the main issues and areas, of course, is recognition of indigenous rights, right? We have an ongoing challenge in the Caribbean, as Kasike said, that the English, the Commonwealth of the Caribbean, views that indigenous peoples were extinct. None left, nobody not there again, and therefore the colonizer can claim everything, right? When we know that that is totally a myth, and we know that now because we have the oral stories, we have the documentation, and now we have the DNA to show that that is totally a myth, right? Also, then we have the issues of land reform. Land reform, again, is a big issue because land reform was claimed and used to perpetuate and amass power. And so, land redistribution, ensuring that African and African descendants have a right and an entitlement to land, irrespective of the imposition of colonizers' white land system. And says you have to have title, you have to be able to show this and that, and so forth. We know that our African land tenure systems, right, predate and continue to be operative in Jamaica and the Caribbean, and so they were recognized and legally empowered, including Maroon land, Taíno land, Rastafari land, land for all Afro-descendant people as a result of reparations for the slave project. And so legally, these kind of things we're looking at to ensure that, again, the racialization is done throughout society, education, spiritual, cultural, etc., removing all of these legacy and messages that we have from.
Thanks for that. And I know those of you who were here yesterday in the afternoon after the speech by or keynote, I know that something was said about land and a kind of off comment about what the reparationists are doing about internal reparation I had to leave, so I wasn't here to say to our guest speaker, Peter Phillips, that the National Council on Reparation, and Stephen, you and I are members, the National Council on Reparation has an internal reparatory justice working group, as well as embracing the external reparation agenda. They are linked, of course, because it was the colonialist project that created the landlessness among our people. And but the internal group is working on those issues. Internal reparation for example, Rastafari, not only in land reclamation, but other ways. And some reparation has actually been paid by the government of Jamaica. The Rastafari might not be enough, but it has been a start. So I wanted to say that those two are linked, and the land issue is before us. But we know what are the internal reasons for it and what are the external reasons for it. Two are linked. One doesn't go without the other. So let me throw the same question to you, Stephen, and then Myrtha. And I'll end with you with that question in terms of the implications of decolonial, I'm struggling with this word again this morning. Decoloniality in charting a reparations agenda. And also, Stephen, in your own teaching, I wondered how you deal with this.
Morning again. First thing I'd like to do is decolonize that air conditioner.
It is cold.
You know, we talk about decolonization, but to be honest, you know, the problem is not colonization, right? Colonization is a function of civilization. It's a function of global growth. You know, there's a reason why the big river in India is named after an Ethiopian king. India at one point was a colony of Ethiopia. Egypt at one point was a colony, you know. Modern Europe as we know it is largely as a result of the Roman Empire, right? The real problem is white supremacy. And that's an uncomfortable word. And so we use words like colonial, but the fact is that Europe made a mess of colonialism. And chattel slavery introduced the factor of the dehumanization of a sector of the population, which didn't exist before. So again, when people talk about reparations, I understand slavery is an old, ancient part of civilization also. But chattel slavery was the first time that as a result of it, it had us thinking that one sector or one branch of the human race was not human, or was, you know, subpar or below par. That's the error, and this is really why reparations is due and they should pay reparations. Now, when we talk about the decoloniality and the reparations agenda, narrative, again, I'm coming back to this. Narrative. We've suffered from a lot of lies. And there's a reason, you know, if we talk about, what's the word for the thing today? Epistemic, right? Europe knew what they were doing. They crafted a system. In order to keep chattel slavery going, they had to justify it, and so you had popes who were writing papal bulls and saying, oh, this is, you know, for Christianizing and for improvement. Lies. The Greeks knew of the achievements of Africans long ago. Europe knew this. And as I said before, if you look at the Congo Empire, the way they came into Africa, it wasn't with this bravado of white supremacy. It wasn't with this we're going to conquer kind of thing. That came later. And to justify the myth of white supremacy was created. And so colonialism now was no longer about developing where you were and sharing culture and growing. It became extractive and about creating wealth for ourselves. And because we're not recognizing the humanity of the subjects within these colonial holdings, we don't care what we leave there for them. We don't care what development they go through, and we don't care how much they suffer. If they die, we just bring some more. That is the problem. Why coloniality now has a terrible name and nobody wants to. But that's not how it started. And that was a result of white supremacy. White supremacy was created so that a minority could control a majority. And as I've always quoted Steve Biko, that the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the minds of the oppressed. So to make you feel that you are less than. And they did it various ways, through the religion that we've been given, through the education that we've been given. And as a consequence of that, we see the ramifications in our society now.
So Stephen, in your own teaching at Heidel and other places, because I know you teach everywhere.
Yes.
In a minute, if you could just say how you try to break down.
I'll give you one good example,
Okay.
and you might like this, because just to show you how it starts from such an early stage, right? I teach teachers, and I everywhere I go, I ask students, I throw out a nursery rhyme, you know, like I will say, you know, Jack be nimble, and see if the crowd can answer. I know you all can answer, Jack be quick, yeah. And I give the example of, why are we in Jamaica teaching nursery rhymes that were written 400 or 500 years ago that have nothing to do with our culture and our ancestors, right? That are in fact stories about people in a time when we were being dehumanized, and we're still. So what I teach my teachers to do is, we don't say Jack be nimble, we say culture was nimble and Kwara was quick, you know? We got to, when you talk about decolonizing education, that's where you got to start. Early childhood. We can't be telling them no more Humpty Dumpty stories. We can't be talking about Mary, Mary, Quite. You know, Mary, Mary, Quite Contrary is about that queen who was in love with the guillotine and chopping off people's heads, right? Right? We give them nanny, nanny, quite uncanny. So I give you that as an example, but it's in every facet of our education.
What you tell them about Ring a Roses? But we know that was not about roses at all. Anyway, I interrupted you, but I had to throw that one in since you're talking about. Yes, okay. But so Myrtha, the same question for you, but I'm also interested in how in your advocacy you deal with the concept of decolonial justice.
So I'm so glad that Stephen went before me, because the question...
I designed it.
Huh?
I designed it.
Thank you. I don't think that any other country has suffered from more epistemic violence than Haiti. The demonization, the propaganda against Haiti runs so deep and is so embedded and entrenched that even black people have absorbed it. And that is why Haiti has always been isolated, because after the revolution, they put what they call a cordon sanitaire, which is to blockade Haiti to make sure that the revolutionary ideals would not spread. And so Haiti was always, so the first step to committing genocide, as we can see in Gaza or anywhere else in the world, and as to follow up on Stephen's, centuries-long dehumanization of black people, is to dehumanize them and make people believe that they're animals and they don't deserve to live, and they deserve whatever they have coming to them. And so Haitians were demonized at the Haitian Revolution, which was like the most glorious revolution in the world, because it shattered the entire world economic system, which rested on the heinous crime of slavery. So Haiti is the one that broke the myth of white invincibility for the first time and showed that black people could, and they had no weapons. I mean, the Europeans, they conquered the French, the Spanish, the British, who had all the big weapons and the money and everything. And Haitian slaves managed to conquer the three greatest powers in the world. And the entire world order rested on slavery. I mean, it's like they crashed the world, Right,
The stock exchange.
the stock exchange, right? It's like crashing the stock exchange, right? It's like Jamaica taking on Russia, China, and the US today and winning, right? And so that's why Haiti had to be contained, and the Haitian Revolution, being such a glorious war, was demonized as a savage uprising and voodoo, which is nothing more than an amalgamation of all the West African religions that the different tribes brought over, that they merged into the Vodou religion, was demonized as Satanism and devil worship, to the point that in 2010, when there was an earthquake, some American pastors, Jerry Falwell and those people were saying that it was because of the pact that Haiti made with the devil in 1804, because to justify that these great powers, including Napoleon, who was conquering the whole of Europe, who spent 16 years, conquering the whole of Europe, were conquered by these slaves. They had to come up with a story for their people, that it was the devil, they made a pact with the devil. So we need to decolonize our minds from these prejudices, this propaganda against Haiti, the bludgeoning on television about Haiti's name is never pronounced without being followed by the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. This is to drill into people's subconscious that Haiti is defined by poverty, corruption, instability. You never hear a positive word about Haiti. It's always about, dictatorship and violence. And so, let me, to follow up on another point Stephen made about how all liberation struggles are one. Huh?
Half a minute.
30 seconds, okay. All liberation struggles are one and the same, even though Haiti is the cornerstone, the blueprint for all liberation struggles that followed. But all liberation struggles are one. I will quote the Pan-Africanist leader, Kemi Seba, who said, Haiti is the black man left hanging on the lynching tree to terrorize into silence and submission all others, right? And so the epistemic violence is not just the erasure of Haitian knowledge and Haitian culture and Haitian identity replaced by demonization and propaganda. It is also the silencing from the rest of the world that is watching a country being destroyed. Every rule of the Geneva Convention, of the Vienna Convention, every international law of, against foreign interference is being broken in Haiti, and everyone is sitting by watching it happen. And so it's time to cut that black man from the lynching tree, and that will be the first step towards emancipating ourselves from mental slavery, so that Haiti can once again kick off the cycle of decolonization and emancipation, mental emancipation.
Thank you, Myrtha. I think so well said. And because I've been a part of the audience for your advocacy, I know that you do talk about the implications of this for the reparatory justice agenda. And
sorry, I
yes, I'm picking it out of your answer to remind you I'm not coming back to you with that question. So it's
I was giving a background.
Yes, and it's an important background because sometimes we forget, and you always remind us. I just hope they would add women when they're talking about the lynching tree, since we have the evidence of so many hangings for women. But I know the time in which that quote was made, but I always have to say that, because we need to remember that chattel enslavement fell disproportionately on women in all its jurisdictions. Okay, so for Kasike now, and I think the other two questions are going to be linked, so really we have one question left because I think they're related. But to be fair, I have to give you also a chance to talk about the implications. What are the implications of decoloniality in charting a reparations agenda?
All right, greetings again, everyone. from the perspective of the Taíno community in general, not just here in Jamaica, it definitely has to deal with recognizing and addressing the epistemic violence. I don't think there's a full grasp or understanding that is being shared of how deep to the core this resonates with our people. As it relates to the epistemic violence, its impact on who we are as a people, our self-determination. You know, realistically what should be happening is that our economic development or healthcare or education should be dictated, created, and controlled by our communities. And that is not the case as it is today. There are still these ongoing atrocities and issues that our community members have to face and have to deal with. As I sit here today, there is even the question of us validating ourselves. There are the legal structures that Marcus spoke towards as it relates to the rights of our people. Jamaica signed on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but it is yet to be ratified, right? When we sit in these boardrooms with individuals who are people of color, that's the next part of it. You know, Stephen was talking about white supremacy, but the colonization that exists today is really of the mindset, right? And because it is colonization of the mindset, we are, in the English-speaking Caribbean, most of the leaders, somebody can correct me, are people of color, and we're having these same issues. We're having these same issues with us having this concept of lack, and we're fighting with each other, and we're having these issues with each other. During the pandemic, it was like a resource grab. During the pandemic, you see again that epistemic violence as it relates to the medicine ways and the cultural practices of indigenous people. They didn't have the rights to do their practices. They have no free or prior informed consent as it relates to the resources that they utilize. So they would know that a community utilizes these lands for their medicine, for their healing, for their traditions, and they'd sell the rights to someone else without even sensitization. Majority of what takes place, I would say, is free, informed consensus. There is no consent, and it is not prior. Something happens, they call everybody in the community together and say, this is going to happen, and this is what we're going to do. That is the impact and how colonization is taking place in our communities today. And to change that, there has to be addressing of that. It might seem as something simple when King Charles came in power and several of the indigenous speaking people who are under the monarchy called for an apology, but it is important because an apology acknowledges that something wrong has been done. Whether they were the instigators or not, all of this is inherited issues. And a part of that decolonization is that shifting in the mindset for us to acknowledge, as descendants of the people who have the trauma and the people who are benefiting from it, that as of today, these issues still exist, and we have to take a step forward to change it, to change that narrative and to heal our people.
Thank you. And I think as a conference, as an outcome of a conference, we need to take on board advocacy for ratification of the UN DRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, because you can't just recognize it, but you don't ratify it. I haven't done an inventory. I don't know, we have people from different countries here where there are indigenous peoples. Make that a part of your advocacy. It's very important, especially free, informed, and prior consent. And I think about your sites of memory. Your sites of memory are disappearing or being disappeared. And that is something that we have to insist on. We are all talking about the International Decade for People of African Descent, which is coming to an end this year. We're lobbying for the second decade. Stephen and I were in Geneva recently at the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent, where this was centered as an issue. But we have to make advocacy not just about who is on a panel speaking, but as a conference, when you're thinking of what was the purpose of this conference, what's the outcome, what's going to be your advocacy in terms of the issues that we're talking about. So I think the last question, I'm going to twin the two. So think about this, and I'm going to go back to Gabrielle and come up the line. So there are two issues. what are the main obstacles facing the call for repair, and what can we do to galvanize deeper social engagement in a reparatory justice project? So, Gabrielle?
Thanks, Prof. I think all of the panelists have been alluding to it. It's been entrenched in the theme for this discussion today. Epistemic and colonial violence is one of the greatest deterrents to the call for reparatory justice. And I have to draw on some of the personal experiences that I've had, having had the privilege of having a fabulous Caribbean-based education from the University of the West Indies, but then going on to further my studies in the United Kingdom. And I remember submitting research focused on speaking to the links that we have with our contemporary developmental realities and colonialism and chattel enslavement, and quoting scholars that we use every day, Beckles and Shepard, C.L.R. James, using Sir Eric Williams, and the validity of those scholars was questioned, and this is at a higher education institution. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, if at a higher education institution our voices are still being silenced, which is a part of colonial and epistemic violence, if that is taking place at higher education institutions, I can only imagine what it is like in the primary and secondary school levels across Europe. And that was a discussion that I think Prof. Shepard and I have been having with others who are trying to advocate for changing what education looks like along the European continent. And the concern, particularly in the United Kingdom, was that what is slavery? All we know is abolition. We did not introduce slavery, we helped to abolish it. And that means that they're still refusing to draw on the work that our Caribbean scholars have been focused on, which provides so much evidentiary support for this call, this demand, or right to reparatory justice, and that is one of the greatest deterrents. The Center for Reparation Research has started the work moving on to the second question in terms of how we galvanize deeper engagement, and that has to start with engaging with youth. I self-identify still as youth, and we have started the work by, of course, co-authoring, co-editing this textbook on reparatory justice and going to different schools across the region to speak about reparatory justice. But history education is not compulsory one, and it is unfortunately a dying subject. So what do? We have to engage the youth through tools that are most relatable and accessible to them. And a lot of them have moved away from long form content. So it's no longer even YouTube, it has to be TikTok or Instagram Reels or short bite-sized tweets on what is formerly known as Twitter X. And if there's anything, and I think Mr. Désulmé spoke to this, if there's anything that we have learned in terms of what's happening with the genocide taking place in Palestine, in terms of climate change, we have been able to push forward advocacy and an agenda because of the youth and how much they have galvanized support through these tools. And so that is what we have to do. It's how we're also going to fight epistemic and colonial violence, because it's not in formal education systems. So let's sidetrack and find something else to do, and that's engaging in youth from an early stage through tools that are most accessible to them.
Thanks very much. You have given the conference another outcome to the advocacy. I'm happy to hear you say, Gabrielle, that the curriculum and all the subjects you study here have, in a sense, embraced decolonization, because I think since the establishment of UWI, certainly in the history department, that is what we have been doing. Really we started to, and we have been successful in destabilizing what we inherited as truth and building our own knowledge base and our own truths and writing our own truths and ensuring that we support the local publishers in case they don't want to hear from us overseas in some of these, in these publishing houses. So I think you have become an advocate for the education system here. And some of you may remember that report that came out from the UK about 3 years ago, which said that we have to look at the good side of slavery, that it wasn't all bad. And what appalled me was how many of our Global South scholars were on the advisory team. Maybe I shouldn't judge because maybe they objected, maybe they didn't sign it, as some of them told me afterwards. But that is still out there, it hasn't been withdrawn, and it's out there to infect the minds of those who want to say nothing good has come out of the Caribbean. The big lie, of course. And so, coming up the line, Stephen, what are the main obstacles facing the call for repair? And you are a part of the NCR, the Jamaica Committee, and what can we do that we have not been doing before?
Well, I'm answering that question as a Pan-Africanist. 3 things we got to deal with. It's the minds of the people, particularly our people. The unity of Africans, right? The unity of Africans is powerful, but we need to be more organized and more, what's the word I'm looking, more purposeful.
Intentional.
Right? The martyrdom of George Floyd accomplished a lot in terms of shaking up things in the world, but it was spontaneous. He's not the first one to be killed by police. He wasn't the last. But and it's also indicative of the fact that there's a real problem there that needs to be addressed. You know, anytime you see every now and then this spontaneous thing, it means there are issues down there that you keep suppressing, and you just never know what is going to tip it over one day, right? The final thing is also the confidence and the boldness of our leaders. You know, I had this conversation, Prof, at one of the side meetings in Geneva, and the back and forth between the civil society, the grassroots, and the elitists and the politicians. And at one point I just said to them, look, it is what it is, right? 30 years ago, reparations wasn't sexy enough for the politicians to be talking about it. You know, we were considered, what radicals and, them people there. I remember this. Them people.
Disillusioned people.
What are they talking about, right? Yeah, but they didn't see George Floyd coming, right? And they didn't see Colson's statue being toppled. They didn't see the tweet coming about from the British Treasury in 2015.
About
now look where it is,
money.
right? So the fact of these grassroots organizations who have been steadfast, the Rastafari and others for years, is very important. We wouldn't be where we were without them. If they had gone silent, it would have been forgotten. But now we see their influence has seeped into young politicians who are becoming heads of state, like Mia Motley and others. You know, it's their contribution that kept it alive, that now put it in the minds of these people who are taking it. We need each other, right? And the movement has to work together. Finally, also, I just said about reparations being sexy, right? For the educators and the teachers and the professors in the room. Yes, write books. AI is writing books now. I'm telling my teachers out there that this thing of reclaiming our narrative and introducing things that we need to think also, because, teachers need to earn more money. We need to look at where we are in the world. I, for one, and I didn't get a chance to bring this up in Geneva, but we need to take the film industry seriously in terms of carrying these narratives. There's a certain understanding this generation, our generation, has here about World War II, right? And a lot of that comes from the fact that Hollywood was very invested in telling that story for a number of decades. It's illegal in some places to say nice things about Hitler. Can you imagine that, right? Because of the propaganda or because of the narrative that they've pushed for generations. You have kids growing up now, don't know anything about Hitler, but they think he's an evil man. Have you read his book? Have you read? And I'm not defending Hitler, even though I've read his book. But you get what I'm saying? There's a way to put the narrative out there, and film is very important. So I think it has a big role to play in changing the narrative. There's so many things that were said today that I am learning things about that are just not out there. You know, Myrtha talked about the Haitians not having guns. They had guns. They didn't have as much as the white people. I just learned about a Jamaican captain in the British Royal Navy named John Perkins, who was arrested in Haiti for running guns to Désulmé on behalf of the British. It was a British black ops thing going on, right? People don't know the story of the Congo Kingdom, as I brought up earlier. Jamaicans don't think that John Canoe is a thing we do at Christmas. John Canoe was a Hante king who attacked a German-held fort on the coast of West Africa, a slave-holding fort. We think it's a dance thing, beg money thing. No, these are our stories, real stories of our war against this thing, and nobody else is going to tell it for us. It's not in their interest to tell it.
So the advocacy that I talked about earlier as a collective is critical.
Yes.
Because we can't just keep saying that every time history is not a compulsory subject, it's not being taught in our schools. What are we doing about it? That's the question. And I share your view about where is the outrage for Boukman Tuti, for Dessalines, Toussaint, Samsha, Bussa, you know, Nani Grig.
Sons of Africa.
Yeah, where's the outrage?
Never heard of them.
For the Zong, where's the outrage? And where is the lobby for us to plant ourselves more on the landscape in symbolic decolonization? We have done something at UWI, on the Mona campus and at Cavell, by those monuments to those people who created the way for us to be here. And I hope the conference attendees get to at least walk past some of those monuments on the campus to the indentured workers and the enslaved Africans, men and women who were here. And there are about 3 or 4 monuments to that on the campus. And we need to lobby for the change of names. We have started on this campus, but we have to complete that project. I don't know why we have Queen's Way. We need to change that. There are many other names that we could put there. Could be Freedom Way anyway. If we are going to have a pan-Caribbean debate about whose name, just call it Freedom Way. And that should be good enough. So we need to have activism on that. So where have I reached? Myrtha, then Marcus, and then Kasike. In terms of, let us focus on what, I think we have already done what are the main obstacles. I think everybody knows, and we have talked about that. So for you 3, focus on what can be done to galvanize deeper social engagement in the reparatory justice project. I know we have all studies come a long way, but it's not a complete project. Where do we go, Myrtha?
Okay, so I will pick up on Gabrielle's point about, you know, how she was educated at UWI and what she got, you know, in terms of her Caribbean education. Sorry. So, I actually grew up in France. I went to Paris when I was 6 years old. And it's not until I came back to the Caribbean that I realized that all of the golden, you know, palaces that I had visited, the museums, Versailles, Tuileries, all of these monuments, cathedrals, were built on my ancestors' blood. Mm-hmm. That I was actually walking on my ancestors' blood when I was visiting these monuments. And I came from that Eurocentric setting and fell into the University of the West Indies, and I don't want to age myself, but it was the time of Black men redemption, and Haiti was being used as a symbol of Black liberation at UWI. And I was like a kid in a candy store because it was like, you know, I was discovering, and I was in my French literature class, I was reading a book on the Haitian Revolution. In my Spanish literature class, South American literature, German literature class, I was reading a book on the Haitian Revolution, you know, Caribbean history, Black Jacobins. And I realized, and as she said, and this is what, because the erasure of Haitian knowledge, the devaluation of Haitian culture, of Haitian learning, of even the name of Haiti, all that has to be restored to repair this epistemic violence. Haitian history has to be taught in schools. Can you imagine? The greatest revolution of all times, the ones that we are taught that are purported to be the greatest revolution, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, those revolutions kept slavery intact. The only revolution that had as its purpose to liberate all of mankind, to say that all men are free, that slavery is a heinous crime that should not exist within the human race because all men are created equal. It's Haiti that said all men are created equal, not the US, because they had slavery, right? Until 1863 when Haiti had its independence in 1804. And they blockaded Haiti precisely because they did not want that concept that all men are created equal to spread. So Haiti was isolated, and that history is not taught anywhere. Sorry. You're not taught anywhere, probably in the Caribbean.
I wouldn't say not anywhere.
No, that's why I'm coming to. I
Yes.
said in the Caribbean, in Haiti. I mean, imagine in France, not only did the Haitian Revolution change the course of world history, but it radically changed French history, because Napoleon, losing the richest colony in the world, that destabilized him. He gave up his American project, and sold half of the U.S. to the United States, which became the Louisiana Purchase, that doubled the size of the United States for a fraction. It was like 2 million kilometers for a fraction of what was extorted from Haiti, right, for that ransom, which was like 10 times the value of the colony. So, I want to tell an anecdote. I watched it, I don't know if you guys saw this movie called Amistad. It's a brilliant movie. And one of my favorite scenes, one of the greatest speeches in film history, is in the courtroom when the lawyer, played by Anthony Hopkins, who is defending the Africans who rose up and mutinied and captured a ship that had taken them from Africa, and they were trying to get back to Africa, and that was the only case that was known. They were trying to get back to Africa, and they kept the captain alive so that he could take them, but he fooled them and took them to the US, and they were imprisoned and put on trial. And there's a brilliant lawyer who was the third president of the United States, actually. And he was defending them, and played by Anthony Hopkins, you can imagine. And so in the courtroom, he calls the chief of the Africans and he says, look at this man. First he gives a whole spiel about the importance of freedom, the importance of what men will do for it. They will decimate nations, they will do everything to get back home, to get back to their country. But he's talking about the human race. Any human being will do anything for freedom, because freedom is the most important gem, for a human being. And so he says, so he calls him up, and the judges are there, and he asks him to stand up before the judges, and he says, this man is the only true hero among us. If he were white, he would not even be able to stand up from his seat, because he would be so laden down with medals and decorations. We would be writing songs about him. Our poets would write poetry about him. Our children would know his name, because we would ensure that he would be in the history books. But because he's black, he's standing before you, fighting for his very life. And that is the history of Haiti.
Yeah.
So what we need to do, and I'm wrapping up, is to
I want to give the audience a chance to
lift
interact.
that veil of Haiti, that veil of silence, that veil of isolation. Teach Haitian history so that people know what Haiti represents, what Haiti contributed, not only to the black race, to the human race. Because a lot of people, even in the Caribbean, who are looking down on Haiti, would still be walking around in shackles if it wasn't for Haiti. So we need to lift that veil of lies, the lies that we have been fed, the propaganda, speak the truth about Haiti, teach history in the US, in Europe, in all of these countries, so that we know what Haiti really represents.
Thank you. And add to that how Simon Bolivar had to get help from Haiti, United States South, and also how Jamaica did not help. Well, it was the British really in Jamaica.
There would be no South America without
it was almost
Haiti.
Killed when he came here for aid anyway. And just do me one favor, look up the history of the Deep Nine, when Jamaicans enslaved Africans stowed away. And when the owner came back for the ship or the boat, President Petion said, "You came for your property? It's more down the road there." But these people are Haitians. They have Haitian citizenship. I think that must be known by everyone. And so, Marcus and Kasike, what can be done to galvanize deeper social engagement in a reparatory justice project?
Yes, Prof. Okay, so I will speak just very briefly and try to make some points that are pointed. So the first I would say is that we need to infuse, as we say, a reparatory justice decolonial approach to our education system from early childhood. Stephen said come right up to even UWI. I agree with what I heard Gabrielle saying. I hear all the Myrtha saying that UWI has definitely shaped, my thought, my outcome on the world and on the rights of Africans and so forth. I do think we need more activists, academics though. We have a lot of UWI publications which I know are published and shelved but aren't put in action because many of the graduates are activists, like I hear again from Gabrielle saying. I think that's important because a lot of great thought happens on campus, but then sometimes the real world afterwards, working environment, the structure that we have to then go and fit into, mean that our theories here don't get a chance to get the light of day. I think also we need an internal reparations focus. I think that is a big part of it. People see this request to the white man for money, this is how most people kind of simplify it, as being far-fetched and just, not something that they feel entitled to or, to sign on to. But I think that in a local context, we can do so much more to show persons that we here recognize these injustices and these legacies. We here recognize our duty to also fix these things, which would come with education, come with some empowerment, healing, reconciliation, right? We see where the Truth and Reconciliation Commission again in several countries. We've never had anything like that in Jamaica or in the entire Caribbean to try to, at least at our level, deal with the issue that we have tried to avoid for centuries. So I'd love to see our internal reparations focus is on par with, right? If not even before we, and at the same time then simultaneously as we approach Europe. I think CERD, I've really come to appreciate CERD, again, largely through Prof's work. I see CERD as a lot of tools. CERD is the UN Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. A lot of tools I see there have, work, recommendations, and support services to assist countries like Jamaica to be able to systematically descale our lives, our societies, our governance systems of racialism and discrimination. Very, very important because every fabric of Jamaica, we see these things still thriving, unfortunately, because we don't recognize it, right? And we saw where the government of Jamaica said 2 years ago that we don't have racial discrimination in Jamaica. And I'm saying, I'm not sure which Jamaica they're talking about, but here we are, showing from centuries of it. We've not done anything to repair it, and we're saying we don't have it. The third is very important. I think we have a schizophrenia in Jamaica. Because we at the same time are saying that we are the proud successors of the slave master, the king and the queen, and we are there, we all power derives from them. At the same time, we're trying to say that, well, we want to be able to get justice from them. And I think that is having our policy makers in an actual conflict of interest and schizophrenic internal situation that needs help. And finally, I think constitutional reform is important because also constitutional reform at the core of who we say we are, how we say we should be governed, And I think that is something that we take for granted because we think that everybody has the same constitution. We think that we are here in Jamaica and everybody is in the same life that we are in because we have only been used to this colonial box that we set ourselves in. When we look at what's been done in our country, we see where in some countries the customary laws, the African chiefs, the communities have their governance powers, they have their court system, they have their parliamentary councils as well. So when we think about governance, we need to change, and so that's an important part of it. Constitutional reform is ours, is to embrace it, and make our voices be heard and be free to think outside of the colonial box we've been placed.
Thank you. Yes, please go ahead. It's encouragement for the panelists. And since you mentioned CERD, may I just say for all those who are interested, and Jamaican NGOs could be interested, that the UK comes before the committee in August this year. So already people are calling to ask me, how do they get to engage with the committee in terms of an alternative report to what the state will come to say. Kasike?
All right, so I guess I'm just adding to the icing out everybody else is sharing because all of us here have the similar sentiments. I would say from tapping into the Taíno perspective on some of these things, I think we could do with some community outreach. Community outreach twofold, right? There's the schools and then there's the community centers, trying to bring the community together because there's a lot of intergenerational trauma. And in spaces where we can find our community members that are gathering and coming together, we need to share more with them about awareness. We need to celebrate the goals that have been achieved. Not a lot of people are aware in these communities that these steps have been taken and the struggles that our ancestors had to go through and where we are now and where the reparatory movement is today and where it is aiming to go. So I think that is important to get it down to the grassroots level. The next thing that I would touch on with that is definitely infusion of more arts and culture, right? Stephen was talking about film earlier, and along with film, there's drama, there's music, there's arts, there's a lot more incorporation of that into how we are expressing the reparatory movement and what can happen and what can come and the timelines. I've seen for myself the power of dramatization in healing and healing a lot of these wounds which are traumatic in nature, where there are things that we may not be able to express with words, but movement, dance, poetry allows us to really connect deeply with these things, to bring them to the forefront of our mind and realize that there are these wounds there that need to be worked on. At the core of it all is really bringing to awareness of our community members and people in society that there are these issues that we suffer from them on a whole, as a collective. And it is shared between all of us, and these are the symptoms that is coming from these issues that we've suffered. And reparation is really about healing that so that we can get more people involved. I think at the grassroots level, that is where that connection needs to be done. And the last thing I'd share is that what we're doing here, this interdialogue amongst different stakeholders about these things, I think it's important. More forums like this. I commend the organizers and the panelists that are here today that are sharing that we each leave from this space learning something new, and I guess a part of that activism that we can carry forward is that we bring back that information awareness to our communities and to our groups. The work that has happened with the Rastafarian community, the things that they're doing, the work that Stephen is doing with the schools and the teachings, the academic papers and the research that is going out, what is happening with the Taíno movement today, the advancements in DNA and how that is being used, how CERD is being used. There are so many issues that the solutions exist, and is really just to fill those gaps. We in this room are aware of so many things, and it would be so surprising. Marcus touched on something briefly, that the average Jamaican, their view is that this is something external, asking some white people for money, and they're not seeing how once that reaches down to the root level in their household, where they could have been, where they should have been if they were following their ancestral ways, knowledge and system, and how this colonization has taken that from them so that repair can take place. The last point I touch on, just to connect it, is that when we talk about reparation in indigenous communities, specifically to the Americas, the term that is used a lot is land back. And what our community is focusing on is the healing more than the land back. Why? It's because if we're still using the colonized mindset, we're going to end up with the same issues where the community is going to have the land, and 2 generations down the line, we're going to sell it again to the highest bidder. So it is that awareness and that understanding. The indigenous principle is looking 7 generations ahead. Looking 200 years again, what can we do today that will be sustainable for our descendants to come? So thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you so much. And Pat, over to you.
Yes. So ladies, well, everyone here gathered, thank you. We've covered a rich set of issues and gotten very insightful perspectives. We'd like to crave your indulgence if you'd allow us around 10 minutes into the coffee break, because we're supposed to break now for coffee, to just have a conversation, and then we can go to coffee break. So if you allow us that privilege, I'll turn the mic back over to Verene.
Okay, so do they have mics in the center there for, maybe we can have maybe 3-4 questions? I see 1 hand, 2 hands, you will have the mic. Well, okay. Our friend in the blue shirt, I'm sorry to say that I don't know your name, has, Omar, you want to help? Here's another mic. Here's another mic, Omar. Omar is from the Center for Reparation Research as well. Or
Hi, good.
Yes.
Good
The
morning.
second hand was over here. Yes.
Good morning, everyone. It's really lovely to meet you, Professor Shepherd. I've taught some of your work actually in my class.
Thank you.
On Black reparations. So I'm very pleased to meet you here. And actually, this panel was very, very, I think, enlightening. My name is Keston Perry, by the way. I'm a professor at UCLA. And I wanted to ask a question, to trouble a little bit this question of recognition. From whom would we like to be recognized? Our systems of belief, our systems of thought, our traditions. To whom is it we're asking the UN to recognize us, which in my view is also an imperial institution? Who are we asking to recognize our value of, because I think some of the discussion on reparations, I feel, and actually the last speaker just gave a hint about this, it hasn't reached down to people's understanding or meeting people, as Walter Rodney would say, meeting people where they are, to understand what they're learning, what their lessons, what their insights are from their own experiences, and how that can infiltrate, I use that word very purposefully, infiltrate the CARICOM reparations discussion and debate. Because I feel there needs to be a little bit more debate and discussion, right? So my first question is, recognition from whom and by whom, and what does that offer to us, right? If we're talking about decoloniality, right? And what about a broader, much more mass-based debate?
Okay, I'm going to get to the questions first. Yes, so there's over here, 2 over here, and I can only take 1 more after that. Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Professor Shepherd, happy to meet you and the panelists. My high regards to the panelists. I was intrigued and forced to reckon with the reality of the issues that you covered and the narrative that you articulated them with. And I say that with the background that my focus is in Caribbean philosophy. And I started off interacting with the work of 10 prominent writers and authors. And eventually, I discovered that reading aspects of these writers and authors, I was I was caught up with cascading images of self and collage of identities. And it caused me to reflect on the question, what am I? What is the self? And I'm going to be very brief. We can approach understanding the self from two narratives. Either the anatomical approach, which really speaks to the elements of the self, or the predicative approach, which speaks to what can be said about the self and what the self does. So let me get to the question.
Otherwise, a lot of time from the audience as well.
I didn't think I would fall into this situation. Nonetheless, let me get to the question. The self and the predicative narrative and the anatomical narrative that we propagate about who and what is a human being. Does this narrative accord with the bar of reason about the self as a constitutive entity with consciousness?
Thank you. I'm not going to ask anyone on the panel to answer that. That's another conference. And you have actually provided some of the answers yourself. So one here and one over there.
Sorry
yes,
to interrupt, there's a question on Zoom as well.
Okay. Can you bring the question on Zoom for us? Just get it to the podium. Yes, Omar? Yes.
Good morning. Good morning, Professor Shepherd and all distinguished members of the panel. I really enjoyed the session this morning. My name is Doreen Gordon and I'm in the Institute of Gender and Development. And while some of the panelists were talking about erasure, I was thinking about Antonov Fermin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Yes. Yeah, who wrote a book in 1855 on the equality of the races.
Yes.
And I only recently discovered this as a teacher and started putting it into my lectures.
Yes.
So that's the whole question of, decolonizing your curriculum and your teaching. And just fascinating that he traveled to France during this time as an educated black man, attended anthropology conferences and meetings when anthropology was developing as a discipline, and challenged the whole concept of race and wrote a book about it. I think that's fascinating, and that these kinds of things need to enter back into our curriculum. So more of a comment.
Thank you, Doreen.
He was also an early organizer of the first Pan-African conference in London, and a great example of the role that Haitians have played continually in the Pan-African movement.
Thanks for that. So, yes, we need a mic. Yeah, you have it. Okay, go ahead.
Morning, everyone. I'm Natalie Dietrich Jones. I'm a research fellow here on campus. Was blown away by this panel. It's reminded me of things I studied here as a student of political science many moons ago, and I'm really happy to see Gabrielle, who was one of my students several years ago. But yeah, anyway, my question has to do with the debate now around the Draxhall issue in Barbados and conversations around ownership of lands and institutions that should really belong to Afro-descended peoples. So what is the thought of any member of the panel on this debate around whether DRAC should be repaid? And I'm tying it to, I guess, the larger conversation around restoration of artifacts, because I think last week as well, there was I noticed on Mona messaging about a return of a specific specimen that will be housed here at Mona. Right, so any thoughts on return of artifacts and how important that is as part of reparatory justice?
And remember, there was a Draxhall here too.
Yes.
But they divested themselves.
So I think we have taken the questions we can, and I'm going to ask Stephen to take the one on recognition. I think the second question was already on its way by the person who asked. Myrtha, I think Doreen just made a question. I was going to see if you have any more thoughts on it. And Marcus will take the issue of drugs. And maybe Stephen could also pitch in with the issue of drugs. But Myrtha, I wanted to, I have to say this, when I watched Amistad, I said you'd never know from that film that slavery was still in the United States, even when that fantastic lawyer was making the case. I just have to say that. Okay, so Stephen?
Yes.
Then Marcus, then Gabrielle, and then we have to wrap.
Let me see
Absolutely.
if I can answer both the questions in one, you know.
Yes.
My learned friend over here was talking about philosophy, but remember the African philosophy, Ubuntu, right? I am because we are. In terms of recognition, and this is the reason why I spoke about reparation in terms of what happens after a war, right? I often say to my students, try to put your mind's eye in your ancestors' place 300-400 years ago. And without going through the usual rituals I do with really making you understand what it was like to be on a slaver, which is what they call these ships. I end also by saying that of those who fought and died and who chose death over life, right? We are the descendants of those who held on to life. And I could only fathom one reason why they would do that. Particularly as a father, when you're separated from your family, facing horrendous challenges, the only reason you could have to live is for that return. For that, none of them were thinking, oh, we're going to be Jamaicans, Little and Talawa. None of them were thinking, oh, Caribbean is a great place to live and oh, we're going to... None of them were thinking that. The only reason they must have held on to life and persisted was for that opportunity to make right what had gone wrong. And then think about this now. If we are, because of them, it's our very reason to exist. Because it's the only reason they held on to life. And if they didn't hold on to life, we wouldn't be alive. We have a duty to finish this war. We have an obligation to see it through to the end, and that end is reparations. So when you talk about recognition, it's not that we're asking anybody to recognize us, but more so, we want our ancestors to recognize that that mission that they tasked us with, we completed. We were a part of their mission. They were willing to sacrifice, knowing that this war may take them several generations. If we drop the ball, we deny the very reason we have to exist.
So we have to say we're on it. Okay, Marcus, and then Gabrielle, you'll have the last.
Just to say.
No, I want to say something about
Myrtha?
to answer the
you can talk over coffee.
No, I have to say
the audience will have to give you permission, not me. Okay, so Marcus.
Okay, on drugs hall, right? So I think this again, highlights the issues that we have when we don't have a legal way to repair, right? Because here it is, same way how we have Haiti being required to pay reparations, right, to the enslavers, same way how we have the planters in Jamaica being compensated for the loss of their property, so-called. The same way now, the international system is pretty much expecting, right? The legal system would expect that, therefore, there will be compensation for what is known to be a reclaimed drugs hall. When we see what President Mugabe and other African leaders tried on the continent of Africa, when they got the reins of power to reclaim land, right, that was seen as radical. Because you're taking away people's land without compensation, without rights and due process, and it was very much decried, and some say it didn't work, but it wasn't given a chance to work, right? But the fact is that a proper reparatory model could not require compensation to be paid for the taxes for that property. And so I think that, again, maybe a more liberalized, open-minded government, right, could, which I see actually here, we passed a law in Jamaica the other day to pardon some of our heroes who were deemed criminals because we're freedom fighters. So we can pass laws in Parliament here same way to compensate the Africans in our countries and not to have to compensate these persons. But the current legal framework does not allow us to do so.
And you will notice that Honorable Mayor Motley has gone back on
Yes,
that
you did the
decision to pay drafts £3 million for some land. And I think it's because of the power of the reparation movement and the opposition to that. So Gabrielle?
Right. And from this question speaks to something with Prime Minister Motley as well. This question is, just trying to ascertain.
This is the one from Zoom.
From Zoom, ascertaining thoughts.
Thank you for that, or online viewers.
Ascertaining thoughts on Prime Minister Motley's reparatory approach to debt financing and the climate crisis. And I smiled when I read the question because what in essence she has been advocating for is something that is not new to the centre or even to this room, because I believe in 2019 we hosted it was a workshop, a panel discussion much like this on climate reparations with Rutgers University. And the consensus from that was evidently we need climate reparations because we as a majority of people of African descent, but also indigenous peoples, as well as those who are the descendants of Indian indentured or Asian indentured laborers, are in this region that is the most impacted by climate change. But global systems, if we look at climate financing to begin with, has meant that we do not have the support for climate mitigation or adaptation. And a lot of the issues that we have now, based on what scholars have done in terms of research, are as a result of colonial age practices, agricultural practices that have led to us having this high susceptibility to flooding, landslides, droughts, things that we see happening now at an alarming pace. So I agree wholeheartedly with Prime Minister Motley's approach. It's something that the Centre has, through this workshop, also advocated for, but a huge part of that also has to be challenging the ways that we are able to receive funding that should not, again, be a favor or charity for climate mitigation and adaptation, because at the end of the day, we're the most impacted, but as what is now classed as upper middle income countries, we do not receive the same concessional loans for climate financing, and that is an issue. It is a right that is owed to us. We've been thrust here, we've been told to deal with it, but we have not been given the tools that are owed to us to deal with it.
Thank you, Gabrielle. And I think that's why a new word that has come into being, I was at a conference in Berlin recently where this was discussed, is the capitalocene, which is linking climate change with capitalism, and that is something I think we have to look into. Myrtha, with 30 seconds help?
Well, first to the person who was saying who do we want to be recognized by, it's not a question of asking to be recognized, it's to dismantle the lies and the propaganda, because the white supremacy owns the international media. And so, they brainwash the entire world with lies. And everybody's, propagating them, and we are at the end of that propaganda, suffering murder, police brutality, lack of opportunities, everything else based on those lies. Now, I just wanted to pick up what the lady said about, because Désulmé, of course, is, a giant of anthropologists, and he was answering because the magnum opus that sought to underpin the white supremacist project was written by a French aristocrat called Comte Gobineau in 1848. And the only person who ever stood up to answer that, to challenge and destroy the myth of white supremacy was Désulmé. In 1885, he wrote a book, because Gobineau's book was called On the Inequality of the Human Races, and he wrote a book on the equality of human races. So that is a very important point. And also, Haiti defeats every anti-reparationist argument, because if you could bleed an infant nation for 122 years, after building your country for 3 centuries on the blood, sweat, and tears and exploitation of that country, and now claim you don't owe the people that you exploited, Haiti shows up the lie and the hypocrisy and double standard of the interpretionists.
Thank you, Myrtha. Thank you very much.
And I want to say that the UWI, my black experience at UWI healed my soul, and that shows how important, you know, destroying the epistemological erasure is.
Can we give you a clap? Healed my soul, and I know how tortuous you or we all, you know, your journey has been in terms of going back and forth and thinking about your country. And we all sit with you and talk with you and empathize. And we are in this struggle. You and I were in South Africa at the invitation of former President Mbeki.
Yes.
To try to educate South Africans about why.
Yes, that there is a country, that a black country that is right in itself.
That's right. And we were so
honored.
Yes.
Teach the Pan-African youth about.
But I think the issue of recognition, I don't know if you were thinking about the theme for the decade for people of African descent, which is recognition, justice, development. And I can say that recognition made its way in because it was supposed to be reparation, justice, development, but the opposers didn't want reparation in the theme. And so recognition is their problem, not ours. So let me thank the panelists and the audience for such an engaging discussion and encourage everyone to become advocates in the fight for reparatory justice because the fight is still on. As the first president of Trinidad and Tobago and the last Governor General, Sir Ellis Clark, said in 1964 at a conference on colonialism, and I quote, "An administering power is not entitled to extract for centuries all that can be got out of a colony, and when that has been done to relieve itself of its obligations, justice requires that reparation be made to the country or countries that have suffered the ravages of colonialism." And let's embrace that. And as a region and as part of a global community, we are taking on issues that only courageous people can take on. But then, as Nelson Mandela once said, as he reflected on his life's lessons, quote, "I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it," end of quote. And Maya Angelou's take on it is that courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. And I don't think you will forgive me, Stephen, if I didn't end with Marcus Garvey's own take on it. Marcus Garvey urges us, here's what he said: lose not courage, lose not faith, go forward. Thank you so much. Come back at 11:05.